and welcome to Enquire's podcast. We are here to chat today all about additional support for learning in Scotland, where we'll invite a range of experts from across the sector to help us understand more about children and young people's rights to support at school and in the early years settings like nursery. So we hope this will be helpful for all of our listeners, which includes parents, carers and professionals. And today, the expert that I've got with me is Ellenor from a helpline. Hi, Ellenor. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Hi, Mark. I'm happy to be here. My name's Ellenor. I'm an advice and information officer working for Enquire. I'm the person that you get through to when you ring the advice line.
Good, perfect. And I should have introduced myself as well. So I'm Mark. I'm a senior information and advice officer at Enquire. I've been here for about 6 years now and work with Ellenor on the helpline, as well as looking at some stuff like our website and the information that's on there. So today is all about support plans and planning children and young people's support at school. To get us kicked off, maybe it would be good with a back to basics question. What is additional support for learning?
Well, children and young people have a right to additional support for learning. It just means that if you need more or different help at school for any reason, you have a right to the support that you need to make the most out of your education.
Absolutely.
Mark, does every child with additional support needs need to have a support plan?
All children and young people in Scotland should have some form of personal learning planning. So that means that the nurseries and schools should be checking that they're getting on okay and how they're tracking how they're getting on with their learning. But some children and young people need more individualised support, and that sometimes requires extra kind of plans. They're not always formal plans, so not all children that have extra needs, extra support needs, will have a specific plan, but often they might do. So I mentioned there that there's lots of different types of plans that can be used. Would you like to tell us, Ellenor, what are the different types of plans that can be used in Scotland?
Sure. So you might have an education plan at your school. It might be called an individual education plan or something along those lines. They tend to have different names in different local authority areas. You might also have a wellbeing plan or a healthcare plan, for example, if your child has healthcare needs that need to be seen to at the school. And of course, there's the coordinated support plan, which we'll be talking about today. Mark, what is a coordinated support plan?
So a coordinated support plan, or a CSP, is the only legal educational plan that's used in Scotland. So it's a plan that focuses specifically on education. So it's looking at what support a child or young person needs with their learning. But it's where children have quite significant or multiple complex support needs. Their needs need to be long-term, so likely to last for at least 1 year. And those needs need to have a significant adverse effect on their learning, so having a big impact on whether they can benefit from their time at nursery or school. The final test to being able to get a CSP is that there needs to be significant support from more than just education, so from education and at least one other agency. That'll often be an NHS service, so something like speech and language or maybe CAMS, or from, say, social work department or something like that. But that's what CSP is. So it's similar to the other kind of educational plans that you might see, but it's a legal plan. So what is written into a CSP must happen. Is a CSP better than other educational plans?
Not necessarily. Everybody has the right to additional support for learning, and that doesn't change depending on what kind of plan you have. But as you say, the CSP is a legal document. So that means that if it's not followed or if you're unhappy with what's in it, you can take that to tribunal.
Absolutely. It just adds that accountability, doesn't it?
That's right.
I explained earlier that CSPs have that eligibility. So it's quite a high bar that children need to have quite significant level of support needs and need to have lots of support from multiple agencies. So it means that there are going to be lots of children and young people who have support needs, but maybe aren't eligible for a CSP. So if a child isn't eligible for a CSP, what are other types of plans they might be able to get instead?
Well, there's plenty of other types of plans. A very common one would be like perhaps an individual education plan that you would draw up with your child's school. And it's just something to help you and the school work together to think about the child's support needs and plan how to meet them. And then, of course, to review how the support is working out.
Yeah, absolutely. And maybe I should have said as well, individualized educational programs more often than not get called IEPs. So people might have heard that and then not be sure what it is. So that's what we're meaning.
It's important to know your acronyms.
Yeah, but as we said earlier as well, though, like the plans all have lots of different names, don't they? So what we often say on the helpline is the name of a plan often matters less than the content of it. So don't get too caught up in asking for a very particular named plan. It's more about, I think my child's got support needs, and can they have a support plan to help us all plan that? How are we going to help them? Yes,
that's right, Mark. And how do schools decide what kind of plan a child might need?
So it depends on the type of plan. If it's a CSP, a coordinated support plan, then it's actually the local authority that make that decision ultimately. So if you feel like your child needs a CSP, if you think they meet the criteria, then you can apply to the local authority to ask for them to be assessed for one, and the local authority make that decision. If they tell you no, they don't feel your child's eligible for one, then you have a legal right to appeal that decision, and that goes to an independent tribunal that's separate to the local authority, separate to the school, who can ultimately make a decision about whether or not your child should have one. For other types of plans, it's because they aren't set out in law, it's done more locally, so it would often be the school that will make that decision. And if they initially decide your child doesn't need one, they don't think, then there's a few options really. The first is to try and challenge that. So you can go back to the school and reset out why you think your child would benefit from one. It depends who you spoke to already, but normally you can escalate it up a little bit. So if, for example, you initially had a conversation with your child's primary school class teacher, you could get back in touch with the school by emailing the deputy or the head teacher to ask for a meeting and to talk about your concerns. Or if it's in a high school setting, there might be guidance or pastoral care teachers, heads of support for learning departments within the school, or again, school management like the head teacher. So going back to them, explaining why you're concerned, what you feel your child needs help with, and why you feel they would benefit most from having that in a support plan. If you feel like you've tried all you can with the school, then you can also get in touch with a contact at the local authority. So every local authority has an additional support for learning team or contact who you can get in touch with. Our website, which is enquire.org.uk, has a search function on it where you can find help and find the local authority contacts. So you'll be able to find the details there. But it's ultimately, schools are making decisions about your children's support and about their plans on behalf of the local authority. So if you're not able to work it out with the school, that's always a step up you can go. The other option, I suppose, is to consider accepting the decision not to have a formal support plan, and sometimes there can be a bit of a workaround. So I say it with reluctance because I know it can be a lot to add on. It's already sometimes almost a second job to be following up with all the admin parts. But if you are meeting with the school regularly and having catch-ups with them, and there's been agreement about what your child's needs are and what support they're going to get, that can serve as those meetings can be enough. Like as long as you're comfortable that they're getting the support they need and that the school are checking in with you and you're communicating that. Sometimes we'd recommend that parents and carers send a follow-up email after they've met with school to say, thanks so much for the meeting, just wanted to clarify these are the things that I think we agreed at that meeting. And that email kind of backwards and forwards can act as a written record to refer back to. So if next term you're meeting and reviewing how things are going, you can look back at what was last agreed and see how your child's getting on based on that. So yeah, that was a long answer, but hopefully those are the main options I think that parents have and carers have. We've talked a lot about what can happen when a child has a plan, but some people will be listening to this and thinking, oh, my child doesn't actually have a plan yet and I maybe want them to have one. So what would be the first step in asking for your child to get a support plan in place?
Well, the very first step, and this is the answer for a lot of problems, but the very first step is to go and speak to your child's school. Perhaps the class teacher, if there's somebody that deals specifically with additional support for learning needs, perhaps that person as well. And just open a conversation with them and see if they are seeing the same things as you are, if they agree about your child's needs, and if they think that a plan would be useful.
If after listening to us today, you think that it might be a coordinated support plan, a CSP that your child's entitled to, again, you can start that conversation with the school. And if they agree, they can help you take that forward. But if the school aren't sure, but you still want to ask, like I mentioned earlier, parents and carers have the right to formally ask the local authority to assess their child for a coordinated support plan. So
Yes.
you can look at how to do that on our website. We've got pages all about CSPs.
We've got a
and what to
fantastic
include.
page about CSPs that will walk you right the way through how to make that formal request to the local authority if that's what you need to do.
Exactly.
So what should you do if the school don't agree that a support plan is needed?
So again, to break it into the different types of plans, for a coordinated support plan, if you've spoken to the school about it and they've said they don't think your child needs one, you still have the right to formally request them that they're assessed for one by writing to the local authority. If you've requested your child gets a CSP from the local authority and they've said no, that they don't feel the child needs one, then you have a legal right to appeal that decision by going to the tribunal, the Additional Support Needs Tribunal. And there's also a service called Let's Talk ASN that can help support parents and carers who have a right to appeal to the tribunal. And for other types of plans, if the school just feel like there's not one that's needed, it's the main options are, like I mentioned earlier, is to escalate things up. So you can speak to guidance or the head of support for learning at the school or school management, explain your concerns and ask them to reconsider. Get in touch with the local authority contact if you feel like you've tried everything you can with the school, or see if there's a workaround, like example, just sending follow-up emails after meetings, setting out why you feel, like what you think has been agreed about your child's support. There are also options even beyond that. I realise it's maybe not always the most helpful to go too many steps ahead, but just to say there are still other options like mediation and things. If you think you've already tried the stuff that we've just set out there, then I'd encourage people to have a look at the Working with the School and Solving Problems section of our website, and that sets out the more formal steps even past that.
Yeah, that's an excellent web page. Lots of useful information there.
So one question we sometimes get through the helpline from families is that my child has a support plan, but I don't feel like it's working well for them. So if that's the case, what can they do?
Well, they can ask for a review. So again, the first thing to do would be to get in contact with your child's school and ask for a meeting. You can take a look at the plan together. If it's not accurate or if you think the support that's promised has not been delivered, you can talk it through. It may be that support is in place, but it's just not quite what your child needs. You can work together to try and come up with something else, review the plan and tweak it, write a new one. You don't have to feel like these things are set in stone. Reviewing is part of the process. You can always review.
I totally agree. The plans are only really useful if they are actually kept up to date and they're continually reviewed. So there's no point meeting once and then not looking at it again for a year and your child's needs or their support have totally changed in that time. So it's really good and normal to kind of ask for a check-in and a review to see whether it's still meeting their needs, whether your child's still reaching their targets that they were hoping to meet with that support that was agreed. So absolutely.
And that brings us on to another question. How often should plans be reviewed, in your opinion?
So for a coordinated support plan, it's set out in law that it must be reviewed at least once in 12 months, so once a year. There can be situations where CSP is still reviewed earlier than that. You can, for example, an early review if you feel there's been substantial changes to your child's circumstances. So that might be something like their needs really changing or big big differences or changes to their support. So if something was written in place and then actually they've moved school or they've that service isn't available anymore, like those are the types of things that might trigger a reason to have an earlier review. For other kinds of plans, so for IEPs or for additional support plans, or all the different names for them, they're not set out in law, so there isn't an easy specific answer to say it must be this often. But good practice would maybe be once a term, is to kind of check in and see that there's not any substantial changes needed, see how your child's getting on. And that also helps make sure that their targets that are written into the plan of what they're trying to work towards are kept kind of achievable and not too far off in the distance. I think that's probably us. I don't know if there's any last tips or anything else that you think we've not had a chance to cover today.
No, that's pretty much it. What I would say is, as a top tip, is don't neglect the basics. There's nothing, as useful as just having a good relationship with your kid's school, going in, talking to the teacher, talking to the person with a responsibility for additional support for learning, and just keeping those avenues open, coming back to them if you feel a review is needed. We can talk all day about the different laws and the different escalation strategies and the different things you can do if it's not working. But the best thing is to make sure that you're just keeping the communication channels open with your child's school. Save yourself a lot of trouble down the line.
Absolutely. I think for me, a final point to maybe finish on would be just a reminder that children and young people should be involved in decisions about their own learning and their own support. So it's really important when reviewing and looking at whether they need changes to their support or might need a support plan to involve your child in that process. That can include things like going along to the review meeting itself, but it doesn't always have to. If they're not comfortable doing that, there's lots of different ways they can share their views ahead of the meeting. They could write a statement, they could share them with you. They might be able to get access to an advocate, someone to go along to the meeting with them and help them share their views. So that's always an important thing, is to centre the child in any discussions around what support they might need, how they are experiencing school, what help and changes they can have that would improve things for them. So, yeah. But thank you so much for the chat today, Ellenor. It was great to chat, and I hope that everyone listening found it useful and found something there that was a takeaway from today. Please, we've mentioned it a few times, but remember we have we're biased, but two fantastic websites. So we've got enquire.org.uk, which is for the adults, so for parents, carers and professionals, with lots of information and advice on there. And we also have our sister website, reach.scot, which is for children and young people, where they can find lots of the same information, but hopefully presented in a bit more of a child-friendly way. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.